Welcome to lecture for crisis intervention. We'll be talking about case management issues in crisis intervention. So first, it's important to distinguish some important differences between case management in crisis intervention and in long-term therapy. It differs a couple ways. We can organize in a couple headings here. Time, obviously, in crisis intervention, you're working in a kind of compressed time frame. Things have to be done much more quickly. You don't have as much time to get things done. So everything goes faster, and frequently there's less assessment, less intervention. Doesn't mean that it's not good. It's just got to be faster, and you can't do as much because you don't have as much time. Obviously, your goals also have to be different because of the limited time frame. In long-term therapy, right ways of stating what the goal is, but in general, you're typically looking for some sort of personality change. When I say personality change, you're looking for someone to change the way they think, behave, feel, all of the above or some parts of that, right? And all those things feed into personality. But you're looking to change some consistent way about their experience of the world, right? Versus crisis intervention, you're not looking for things quite so broad or maybe even profound, but really your goal is to return them to equilibrium, to get them functioning again. And then they might need long-term therapy after that to undergo some sort of personality change to decrease the likelihood of future crises. And it's not to say that crisis intervention won't result in some personality change. And crises typically do influence people's personalities, but it's not the goal. It's not what you're working toward. You're just working toward getting them back to functioning and being able to take care of themselves and be safe. And take actions to solve whatever problem is led to their imbalance. Assessment is a lot different, obviously. You're focused on lethality issues, and then looking at what coping skills and resources they have. You're not going to be doing any kind of broad personality inventories or doing a lot of assessment about early childhood issues. So again, just not as much assessment, much more focused on the problem at hand. And in terms of the tools used, there's going to be a lot of overlap, really, in crisis intervention and long-term therapy. But and depending on what your long-term therapy looks like, crisis intervention has generally more emphasis on short-term therapeutic techniques. So not necessarily having someone do a journal writing assignment that, okay, over the next few months you're gonna write and we're gonna talk about themes that emerge. That's not something you can do, obviously, in crisis intervention. So some fundamental differences. Now let's, as we get into talking about case management issues, we'll think about what some of the issues might be like when you're working in some clinic setting. Not some crisis in the field where there's been an earthquake or a car accident and you happen upon the scene or are called to the scene as a crisis intervention specialist, where somebody comes into a clinic to see you, and they're a new client. They walk in off the street, somebody brings them in. And this can happen in private practice, more likely to be in a community mental health center or possibly a student counseling center, someplace like that where people will be more likely to come in for the first time. Couple of issues. One, informed consent. We often kind of don't even think about that with crisis intervention, but yet it's still important to inform them about what you're doing, who you are, what the risks of treatment are. But you're going to have to do it obviously more quickly. You're going to go over the consent, and you're going to get a signature on the informed consent. But you don't think of informed consent ever, and especially with crisis intervention, as a one-time deal. You want to continue to assess that they have been informed and are aware of what they're doing. So you may need to revisit the informed consent again, especially if they have really some impaired cognitive functioning initially. It may not be that valid of an informed consent. They may not have full capacity to give consent. In terms of assessment, we talked about it a little bit. It differs one way. It's primarily going to be interview format. Very rarely will you use a lot of paper and pencil measures because you don't have time to score them. So you should be talking to people to find out the necessary information. We've talked already about what some of that information is. Another thing that depends on your setting and your philosophy in terms of who does the assessment. For in some instances, you'll have somebody who's an assessment specialist. They're an assessor. They're part of an assessment team, right? Where they're trained to do assessments. They won't be the people who do the kind of therapeutic interventions. I think there are a lot of advantages to that model in long-term therapy. It offers multiple opportunities to develop therapeutic relationships, because you can develop a therapeutic relationship with the assessor and then another therapeutic relationship with the therapist, and those are usually good experiences. It also, when you do it that way, it really puts emphasis on the importance of assessment, and there's a focus in terms of identifying some information. And for long-term therapy, I think it's really good sometimes to have clients come and say, what do you want to know about yourself, and what do you want to know from this assessment? And it's easier to stay focused with that if there's someone who's trained to just do assessment, and they're not worried about doing the therapy stuff too. They're doing the assessment therapeutically, but they're not trying to do therapy and assessment. So for long-term therapy, I think it's a great model. For crisis intervention, I'm not as crazy about that model. Some people still use it, and it probably works. But given the short amount of time, I prefer for the therapist to do the assessment herself or himself. That way they can already be building that rapport that's needed to do the intervention. One thing that you'll need to assess for that, obviously you would do in long-term therapy too, but it becomes especially important in crisis situations, is needing to assess for whether or not they might need to be committed, right? Civil commitment, or probably not criminal commitment, but is the person a danger to herself or himself or others? And that's usually what we think of. The other thing is, will the client be able to take care of themselves? Clients will be able to take care of themselves once they leave your office. If not, then they may need to be civilly committed. Civil commitment proceedings typically begin with them being held for 24 to 72 hours, depending on what state you're in a hospital setting. Will they be further observed? In Texas, MHMR will go up there and see them. As a therapist, a master's level therapist, or even if you were a PhD level therapist, psychologist, you cannot commit people. In the state of Texas, you don't have that authority or power. Only physicians and law enforcement officers. So if somebody determines somebody was an imminent threat to themselves or someone else, or they're just totally decompensated, psychotic, then you can't. They need to be in inpatient care. Typically, what you do is you call the sheriff or the police. And if you call the sheriff or the police, picking which one depends on what county you're in, and you have to kind of know your law enforcement officers and kind of what levels of training they have in terms of dealing with people with mental health issues. Sometimes in some counties and cities, the police will be better trained, and in other counties and cities, the sheriff's office will be better trained. So you need to figure that out for wherever you're going to be. Okay. Another issue that comes up with crisis intervention is it's important to identify an anchor. So somebody who's going to be the person's primary point of contact, right? And typically this will be the therapist, you, but it may be, if you have this kind of team approach, it may be a social worker, case manager. But that's a decision that has to be made, and it should be clear to the client who their anchor is and who they can kind of build this relationship with. Is the person that they can rely on. Okay, this person is going to look out for me and make sure that I don't get hurt during this time that I'm not so sure I can watch out for myself. Ideally, you would have a cross-disciplinary team at your disposal to be assembled to help a person in crisis, because people in crises frequently need help from diverse sources, right? And team members may include a medical professional, so maybe a psychiatrist, or even a general physician or a nurse, preferably a psychiatric nurse, because they might need medication. Because they're sometimes you think, if somebody comes in and they're maybe psychotic or having delusions, hallucinations, oh, geez, we have to hospitalize them. Maybe, not necessarily, right? And if you can get a psychiatrist on the phone or on your team, they may be able to treat that person and get them stabilized enough without admission. But again, that's something that it's up to those medical professionals to make that call. So a medical professional would be great. Social worker, obviously they've got a lot of skills that come in handy. And then also someone from the legal community. And it could be, a CASA advocate. If you've got a kid who's going to be taken out of the home. A lawyer, potentially, a police liaison. And speaking of the police, and if there is a police liaison where you're working, developing a good relationship with these folks is essential if you want to provide optimal care to those in crisis, especially people who have kind of chronic mental health issues, who repeatedly experience crises when present to clinics. They often have relationships with the law enforcement officers, and sometimes good ones, sometimes not. So it's really helpful if you can develop relationships so that you can communicate with each other, being mindful of patient confidentiality, but coordinate care and make sure that people that need therapeutic services get those instead of ending up in jail or prison where they're less likely to receive treatment. Other issues you want to obviously address client needs, and you may have to address some very kind of immediate needs. You may have to be prepared to help them locate clothing, food, and shelter. And this may mean knowing of resources that can provide those, social service agencies, churches, but it may also involve providing some of that on the spot. If a client comes in with no shoes, having some spare pairs of shoes or something, or having somebody run out to Walmart to get some shoes for this client so they can go to the next place that they need to go, not barefoot. So those are the kind of things that you may not think of in terms of long-term therapy. You typically don't give your client shoes, but it may be something that comes up with people in crisis. Then in terms of longer-term needs, and not long-term because this isn't therapy, but they don't need it right now, but they need some things to get started right now for longer-term needs. I'm talking about getting processing started, like applying for Social Security, disability insurance, or WIC, or what have you. You've got to get those things going as well. And an important factor to consider when determining what longer-term services are needed is the presence of chronic mental health issues, right? So bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, substance dependence. Those people are probably going to need more longer-term services than somebody who had, kind of a social, interpersonal crisis, but before that, or generally high-functioning psychologically with no complicating issues. Before they walk out the door, you've got to do a couple things. One, you should be doing assessment throughout, but maybe you should be making some decision before they walk out the door based on all your ongoing assessment. Are they okay, right? Are you confident that they are not in immediate danger? Right? And this may mean spending more than 1 hour with them, right? Not necessarily, if but you might. So you have to be flexible. And then you obviously want to document why you think they're not in danger after you've let them go. So we think, okay, why is it I think this person isn't going to hurt themselves or someone else? So, well, the client's mood was calm. She was able to identify the following steps she would take upon leaving the office to address this issue. She indicated she understood how to contact me if she needed assistance, and she knew that she should call 911 if there was imminent danger. So, write all that stuff down and think about that stuff. So make sure you feel good about them walking out the door. One thing that'll help you feel good about them walking out the door is come up with a plan, right? And there's not a prescribed plan that you have to have. Like, oh, well, you have to give clients your phone number if you do crisis intervention. Not necessarily, but you have to make a plan that's clear and that takes reasonable steps to prevent harm to the client. So what are reasonable steps? It's a little bit ambiguous, right? But the general rule is kind of common sense. What would most people think were reasonable steps? So if you're not sure, talk to a couple of people, and if there's a consensus among you, then it's probably reasonable. Right? So it might be that they'll call you if something gets worse, or someone else, one of your partners, who's going to be on call. And if it's anything like that, you talk about, if no one answers the phone, leave a message and someone will call you back within this time frame. And if nobody calls you back in that time frame, do this, right? And always, to never just give them call. Okay, you're going to call this person, right? Okay, oh, you're going to call your mom if things get bad. Okay, great. Always say, if they're not there, who else could you call? If they're not there, who else could you call? Right? And identifying within a reasonable limit as many people as possible, obviously better. Right? And in best case scenario, you work somewhere that has a mobile response team, right? To where if they have a crisis, they put in a call and the van goes out and the team arrives at their door and can provide intervention on the spot. Unfortunately, that's not very common outside of large urban areas. So you have to make other plans. It again is going to vary on what your resources are. But whatever your plan is, make sure it's clear, make sure it's workable, and then have them write it down. Make a copy for your own records, and that way you've documented that they've talked about it. You know that they have it, because if they've been in crisis, they may not remember all the stuff you've talked about. It's good to have those concrete reminders. Then, after they've gone, a couple things you should be thinking about. One, consultation, right? Talking with other professionals, your colleagues. For one, to verify that you didn't miss anything. Okay, they had this problem, we did this and this. They might say, oh yeah, well, did you call so-and-so? They have a really good resource to help this person. So, kind of helps for practical stuff. But you also do it for your own emotional health. Right? This work can be very stressful for you, and it really does help to talk about it, to decompress by talking to other health professionals. And probably better for your interpersonal relationships and better for maintaining appropriate levels of confidentiality to do that with other professionals and not your loved ones at home. Right? So maintaining kind of clear, healthy psychological boundaries between work and home is important. The other thing, follow through. You probably won't be able to get all the processes moving that need to get moving while you're with the client, because there's a lot of case management stuff that has to happen. So you're likely to do some of that case management, social worky type stuff after they've gone. Calling resources to make sure that they're still open and that they haven't changed their rules and all that stuff. So anything that you've told the client you're going to do, make sure you follow through with that before you go see your next client and forget about it. And then, as I've already kind of alluded to, document. You get a boatload of information in a very short period of time when doing crisis intervention work, right? Because you're moving 90 miles an hour, and you're assessing all these different things. A lot of it trying to read nonverbal behavior to get ideas of things. And you're making a lot of decisions about what needs to be done and what they're going to do and what you're going to do. And it's easy to feel overwhelmed after they walk out when you're trying to remember all that you heard and did. So take a deep breath, consult, and then go start writing it down. This is what we talked about. This is what I saw. This is what I heard. This is what I thought. This is the plan. Okay, so that's for a new client. What if it's an existing client? Well, a lot of that same stuff applies, obviously, but then there are a few other issues to think about as well. One, plan ahead, plan for crises. So just kind of assume that your clients, in general, will come in a crisis state at some point in time. Either they'll have a crisis in session or they'll call you, one of the two. So start developing a plan from day one. If such and such happens, if you need me, this is how you get a hold of me, this is what happens. If you start feeling suicidal, homicidal, here's the things you can do. Right? And it depends on your theoretical perspective what you think they should do to de-escalate a crisis. But have that plan that's consistent with your own theoretical point of view and acceptable to the client. And talk about it with them. And then document that you've talked about it with them, obviously. And then in terms of planning ahead, you want to obviously talk about what they should do and what you're going to do. The other thing is you can anticipate when crises may be more likely. You can't anticipate every crisis. Right? We're not mind readers. We can't see the future. But there are times when crises may be more likely. One, ironically, is when they've experienced a breakthrough in therapy recently. They've made some big gain, taken some new step, or gained some new insight, made some new connection between their thoughts and feelings and behaviors, right? So when that happens, they're there's kind of this shift in personality that's happening. When that happens, there's a bit of instability there. They're in this period between their old self and this new self that's yet to be, and they're still in the middle. They're vulnerable to experiencing crises because it's uncomfortable. Change is uncomfortable. We resist change frequently as much as possible. So whenever you've done really good work and you're feeling confident, be on the lookout, because there could be a crisis around the corner. Obviously, other things, anniversaries. If there's a trauma, anniversaries of the trauma. If there's a loss, anniversaries of the loss. Even if it's not something that they came in for. You see somebody who coming in for major depression, and they lost their spouse, 9 years ago. So that loss isn't directly related to the current depression, maybe. But on the 10th anniversary of that spouse's death, that may still have significance and may precipitate a crisis. So be aware of those things. The other thing, when the client takes risk, which is kind of related to breakthroughs. So if you're challenging the client, which frequently do challenge clients to try new behaviors, new thoughts, new things. So going out to get a new job, entering a new relationship, ending an old relationship. Anytime they're moving out of their comfort zone of what they've always done and doing something different, there's a potential for crisis. Because again, we resist change. And then the last one is the last change that happens. Termination crises are not uncommon. Clients that have done good work and they feel good about it and they think they're ready and you think they're ready, and then as it gets closer, they freak out because they don't think they're ready and they're not sure if they can truly be independent and do it without you. Right? So that's one more time to be on alert for. Persistent clients, again, I said it can happen in a couple ways. Generally, either they'll call you outside of session, or it may happen in session. If they call you outside of session and it's during the workday, obviously you can probably, or you can potentially, I won't say probably, you can potentially have them come into the office, and even if they have to come in and sit in the waiting room for 2 hours until you have time to meet them, see them over what would have been your lunch break or whatever. That's one strategy. But they might also call, and more likely will call around 2 a.m., 3 a.m. Then you have to really be on the ball. And we'll talk more later about doing crisis work over the phone. But you potentially could help them resolve the crisis enough, regain enough equilibrium over the phone that you don't need to see them in person. But you have to do some kind of assessment over the phone to determine that and figure out, okay, do we need face-to-face? Or can we kind of do some things over the phone, and can I get them back into a safe place? And if not, you don't want them to come to the office at 2 a.m. and you and them be the only ones there. That's a recipe for disaster. If it's after hours and there's danger, go to the ER. Right? Call if you can't get to the ER. If you think they're in too agitated a state to drive themselves, and no one's there to take them to the ER. Have them call 911. Can you call 911 right now? No, I can't. Okay, hang on this line. I'm going to get my other phone, because everybody has two phones, right? A cell phone and a home phone. And call 911. I'm going to call 911 right now and have somebody come pick you up. Right? And they'll do that. They'll call them well checks to go see if somebody's well. You can tell them, I'm going to call them and they're going to come check on you, and I want you to tell them that you think you need to go to the ER. And then depending on the client and your relationship with them, it might be appropriate for you to go to the ER with them, but that depends on kind of what all's going on in your therapy relationship, and if that's going to create kind of a problematic dependency, or if not doing it would cause more problems. And that, again, depends on too many variables that we don't have time to get into now. But that is an option. The other option is to see them the next day. Okay. But of course you want to try to stay calm, and if they hang up and you're not sure if they're safe or not, err on the side of keeping them safe. Call 911. Okay. Which, I guess I should back up a second. One of the first things you want to ask them is, where are you? Because they may not be at home, and if you need to call 911 or you determine they're not safe, you need to have a good idea of where they are to tell people where to go find them. The other option is they might also have a crisis in session, and this might be a good thing. You might have a client that they may need to enter this kind of crisis state in session and process it and work through it to ever get out of the kind of maladaptive pattern they've developed. Right? So it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it can be an unsettling thing. But again, the important thing is to stay calm, be confident, and take the steps just like you would with other crisis stuff we talked about. Other things that may come up in session, the person may kind of have a psychotic episode and begin hallucinating or having delusions. And related to that, they may also experience a dissociative episode, experience dissociation, where they lose some awareness of where they are or who they are, if it's derealization or depersonalization. Right? With either one of these, you want to stay calm and try to ground them, try to get them in the room with you, connected back to present reality. And so using their name, talking calmly and soothingly, telling them, okay, John, can you hear me? John, I see you looking at me. We're sitting in the room. I'm in the chair across from you. Can you feel the chair under you? Can you hear the hum of the air conditioner? So orienting them to the sounds, the senses around them that are present in the here and now. And oftentimes that can help bring them back. And it doesn't have to happen super fast. Be patient, and they will come back into the room. If they don't, and they're really kind of decompensating, call for backup. That's why, especially if you're in a clinic, it's a good idea to have what we call panic buttons, where you have a little button beside you, and if a client is decompensating and you aren't able to kind of get them back under control, people will come running to help you, because there is obviously safety in numbers. Otherwise, you have another thing that I've seen in some clinics. You obviously have a phone in the room, and you say, 1 second, I need to call the secretary and let her know we need more time. And you pick up the phone and say, tell them Dr. Brown is, or cancel my appointment with Dr. Brown, or you have some code that you tell them, and they know that means, hurry up, come down here, I need some help. But you have it in code so that it doesn't freak the patient out to hear you say, hurry up, come down here, I need some help. Okay. But again, just the main thing again is stay calm, work through it, look at it as an opportunity rather than this horrible, scary thing. James talks about difficult clients. And we talk about working with difficult clients. Really what we're talking about are clients that exhibit or are temporarily exhibiting behaviors that present a challenge to the therapeutic process. Right? And these things can present in a variety of settings, but challenging behaviors may be especially likely to occur in crisis situations. That's why we're going to talk about it now, because of the heightened stress associated with the crisis, and also there's typically a lack of an established relational context, right? Because in therapy you develop these rules in the context of relationship, and you know what to expect. They know what to expect. What behaviors are okay, what aren't. But in crisis, you may not have time to establish those over the course of several sessions. So you may have to be a little more on the ball in dealing with them when they come up. Obviously, one of the ones that we could expect in crisis situations is anger, and then potentially a behavioral manifestation. One behavioral manifestation of anger being violence. Right, and it can be tough to know the line between appropriate venting and escalation. Right, but generally, if they haven't begun to calm down, so they're venting, they're processing, you're empathizing, but after a couple of minutes, if they haven't begun to calm down, you may need to intervene. And when you do, you want to be calm, you want to still be empathic, but you also want to be assertive and directive. Right? So do a couple things. You validate the angry feelings, even if the reasoning behind them is illogical and you totally disagree. Like, they really shouldn't be angry. It makes no sense to be angry. It doesn't matter if it makes sense. They are angry, and you validate that. Yes, when thinking about this, you feel this way. It makes sense to feel that way if you thought that. We may challenge that thought later, but the feeling is perfectly valid given what you're thinking. Okay. And then you tell them very briefly why being calm is important. Anger makes it hard to think clearly. We've got a lot of important decisions to make here, and I'm afraid you may not be able to make the best decision for yourself and for the people you care about unless you're able to calm down. Then give them a strategy for calming down. And again, depends on what kind of therapeutic techniques you think will work best with this client. It might be deep breaths, might be visualization exercise. It might tend toward the more cognitive type of interactions, and it might tend toward the more physical, more using some like Gestalt techniques interactions. But give them some strategy, because obviously they can't do it themselves, or they would have already calmed down. Right? Then, if necessary, set a limit. So if they don't use the strategy, they're not able to calm down, you let them know, I'm concerned about you. I'll let you know that this anger is problematic for what we're trying to get done. If you aren't able to show me that you're becoming calmer in the next 5 minutes, we're going to need to stop what we're doing and find you a place where it's safe to be angry, and take steps to keep you safe. Right? And that may mean hitting the panic button, calling the police, what have you. Okay. Silence. Now, again, what you do in response to client silence depends on the reason they're doing it. But if it's generally kind of, if you have strong reason to believe it's resistance, so they're not thinking, they're not wanting to talk because, well, they have lots of reasons for it, but they're not wanting to talk to you right now. You've got to explain to them you have a limited time. In long-term therapy, it may be different. You may be able to use different strategies, but crisis-intervention, we ain't got time to wait for this. So we've got a limited time. I'm interested in helping you. I'm confident that together we can find ways to improve your situation, and an improvement's not possible without your participation. And then you wait, and you don't get angry. And it's not just don't show you're angry. You really have to be able to not be angry. And you do that by, whatever keeps you from being angry. But my advice would be use some cognitive tools. Use an appropriate frame, and you'll probably feel less angry. And if you can think to yourself, well, this client needs and wants my help, but they're just too scared something right now to work with me. So I've got to give them the space to where they can feel safe, and they're going to talk. Right? And if you can communicate that through all your nonverbal behavior and your tone of voice and all that stuff, they'll talk. And if not, then you really have to go in directive mode and say, okay, well, here are the things that need to happen right now. But as much as possible, we don't want that, because again, we want to maintain their autonomy. So we give them a chance, and we try to optimize the likelihood that they'll talk by giving them some room to. But we can't wait for an hour. Right? We can't wait for 30 minutes. It's time-limited intervention. Client talks about off-topic issues. Right? It may be the client's avoiding talking about things that need to be addressed, right? And this may differ somewhat with long-term therapy. Right? If the client's talking about, when they were a child, they didn't get enough attention from their dad, but right now they need to figure out where they're going to be sleeping tonight. That past exploration might be off-topic. It might be appropriate, depending on your theoretical orientation, in long-term therapy, in exploring those issues of abandonment and attachment and affiliation and whatnot. But for returning you to equilibrium, I need you to make some decisions about what you're going to do now. And it's very much a focus on the here and now in crisis intervention that distinguishes it in many ways from long-term therapy. Okay. That being said, you've got to be careful not to damage the therapeutic relationship when you need to redirect someone. So you comment on the importance of what they're saying, and then move them forward. So it must have been very painful for you to think that your dad didn't value you. And figuring out what those early experiences mean for you is an important thing. But right now, you've got to make some tough decisions about what you're going to do. For now, let's get back to exploring your options and finding one that feels right. And so I'm going to validate, but then I'm going to clearly set the limit. We are moving forward. Manipulation. James talks some about the issues that may come up with individuals with borderline personality disorder, manipulation being one of them. And a brief aside here, because it struck me that James kind of said people with BPD are all this way. They are a very diverse group. They're not all alike. So be very careful about generalizations that you read about people with borderline personality disorder. There are some common themes when you look at a group of people, but they are all still individuals in that group, and they are not clones of each other, and they won't all do the same things or act and think the same way. Okay. That being said, manipulation is one thing that comes up sometimes when working with those individuals, but it also comes up with other clients too. Right? So to keep manipulation from sabotaging your work, you've got to be vigilant for it, but not paranoid. You can't assume your clients are out to manipulate you and screw you over, because it's going to be really hard to be therapeutic if you take that point of view. But you also don't want to assume that people always have the best intentions, and there's no way that they could ever try to manipulate you. Right? So you don't want to be blind, somewhere between paranoid and a sucker. Okay? So be vigilant, and then also you have to be comfortable being assertive, which is a challenge for some counselors in training. Some people that go into this field are very much natural listeners, and one part of being a natural listener frequently is having difficulty interrupting people and asserting yourself and giving people the space to talk, and that's why people talk to you. But there are times when you really need to stop people and be assertive and tell them what needs to happen. Right? And also, if you can recognize the manipulation as an attempt on the client's part to protect herself or himself, and that's based maybe in fear more so than in a desire to just put one over on you, it's much easier to maintain unconditional positive regard and not let any kind of angry transference feelings foul things up. Again, so it's all about how you think about clients. So even clients may be manipulative. If they did, it's really easy to go, oh, damn it, they got me. More therapeutic to think, oh, okay, well, they did that, and I may even was manipulated. Now I'm going to try to understand why they did it, and it's this probably a defense mechanism. And now we've got to figure out how best to help this person, regardless of the fact that they just got me to give them more time or to violate some of my own rules about boundaries. Okay. Okay. So those issues, a lot of things we just talked about apply to individuals and families, but then there's some other issues that come up more so when dealing with more than one client in the room, so couples and families. One of those that you talk a lot about in your family systems classes would be triangulation, right? So you don't want to get triangulated, where a client pulls you with them, so it's me and you against this other person, right? You want to make it clear that you are not taking sides and you will not take sides. I'm on the family side. I'm on the couple's side, right? And if one member tries to become a co-therapist with you, say, well, doctor, what do you think we should do about these kids or my husband? In front of the other people, you've got to address that, and there's lots of ways to do it, and lots of. If you read the family therapy literature, you can read all kinds of techniques. So one way, potentially one way to would be to briefly partner. So briefly create a triangle, briefly partner with a family member that is being subjugated, that's being kind of dumped on. And so maybe it's the mom trying to partner with you to dump on the kid. So then you talk to the kid, how do you think we can help your mom? And you don't stay in that triangle. You don't stay partnered with the kid. You go back. So you're temporarily creating one triangle to disrupt another. But then you shift the focus back to the entire family. What's this family going to do to get where it needs to be to solve this problem? Because again, we're problem focused in crisis intervention. What's the thing at hand? So try to avoid triangulation. Lots of techniques for doing that. We want to prevent attacking and belittling by one member on another. We really interesting. We often allow clients to vent more anger toward us because we're therapists and we can take it, and we know that sometimes it's therapeutic for them to do that. But we can't let some other client be another client's whipping post, right? So we oftentimes set even firmer limits about the expression of anger when there's more than just us and the client in the room. So we don't allow family members to attack each other. If they do, you want to validate their anger. That's a feeling, and it's your feeling. It's not a wrong feeling. But then you've got to do something. And one approach would be to give them better words to express themselves. So just imagine Dad saying, "That little shit cost me $2,000 when she decided to take her little joyride." Okay. turning to the dad, facing directly. I can hear your anger, and it makes sense to me that you're upset about what happened. However, for this to be a safe place for talking that it needs to be, we can't call each other names in here. I want you to practice something for me. I think that as the father in this family, it would be really helpful for everyone else to see you set the example of how to express feelings in here without attacking. So I want you to fill in the blanks for me. When Jada took the car without permission, I felt, now give me a feeling word. And then hopefully they can give you something. And if they do, great job. Okay, now give me another feeling word. How else did you feel? And when you're doing that, you want to watch out for them telling you what they thought. I felt like she shouldn't have done it. Okay, you thought she shouldn't have done it. How did you feel? I felt like she took advantage of me. Okay, you thought she took advantage of you. How did you feel? And you always want to push them back to feelings. Again, it gets them to focus on how they felt and not what the other person did, and that prevents it from being an attack. Okay? And it's also just generally good modeling for some other stuff that needs to happen in therapy usually. Another thing that can happen is one individual might try to dominate the conversation, right? And they may think that their point of view is the only one that's really valid. They understand the problem, they understand the solutions, and they're going to let you know, right? And when that happens, sometimes, again, you've got to be assertive, while still being calm, not aggressive, and you may even need to use clear physical cues to help set boundaries. So if someone keeps talking and you've tried to give them cues that you need to hear from other people, you have to put your hand out. And this is kind of a sensitive thing for some people. So I always say, you hold your hand out with palm facing them, hold it close to your body so you're not coming at them yet. But and you begin to talk, and if they don't take that cue, you slowly start to extend your hand out. Right? So I'm not shoving my hand at you to say stop. I'm not attacking you. This hand's coming up, and I'm slowly coming toward you to make sure I get your attention, letting you know I'm not going to back off. Right? And you're going to say something, like I need you to pause. And again, it's easier to get people to pause than to stop, because if you say pause, they'll assume that they're going to get a chance to keep talking a little bit, and they probably will. But I need you to pause for 1 second. What you're sharing is very important, so I'm going to validate it. And I need you to hear how some of the others are feeling. And notice I said and, not but. So what you're sharing is important, but I need you to hear. No, that kind of implies what you're sharing is important, but no, it's not. So I want to take out that conjunction and put in one that maybe not as grammatically correct, but makes things easier to hear. What you're sharing is important, and I need to hear how some of the others are feeling, or how the others are defining the problem, whatever it is that you're doing. And if it's really a person who's just kind of characterologically domineering, you may want to engage them and say, okay, can you ask your daughter for me how she sees the problem? And if you do that, you don't want to always have that person doing that, but that may help them still feel their needs to maintain some control, probably, or maybe what it's about, or whatever their needs are that are driving that domination. But it also keeps them from completely dominating the session. Okay. Last, let's talk about a couple of ethical issues. And this isn't by any means an exhaustive discussion of the ethical issues to consider in crisis intervention, but just kind of some of the highlights of things that are relevant to crisis intervention. Confidentiality. Important to distinguish between confidentiality and privilege. Confidentiality is an ethical obligation that we owe clients with whom we have a professional relationship. And it's pretty clear that you have a professional relationship with someone if they're in your office. If you're providing crisis intervention on the scene of an accident, it seems a little less clear for some reason, but it's not. And even if they're not paying you, so if you're doing kind of pro bono stuff, it may still be a professional relationship. So if you're acting with them like a counselor, then it's a professional relationship, and you have an ethical obligation to keep what they tell you confidential. Right? Privilege is a legal issue, and the client is the holder of privilege. That means that they have the right not to have you share information, right? Unless they tell you it's okay in general. And then obviously there are limits to both confidentiality and privilege. It's the standard things that we always talk about. If you tell me that you're going to hurt yourself or someone else, report of abuse to a minor, disabled person, or older adult, or if you sue me then you give up your privilege, and I may have to break confidentiality. Okay? And these issues of harming yourself or someone else, and also issues of abuse, become much more pertinent frequently in crisis situations than in your other therapy situations. That may be why they're there, because they're thinking of hurting themselves or someone else, or they're the victim of some type of abuse. Right? And one of the things that may come up that people often ask about is, well, what if it's domestic violence? Well, I think it's unfortunate. Unfortunately, that's not one of the things that allows us to break confidentiality. If one person is hurting another person and they're both adults, we are not freed of our obligation to break confidentiality. You certainly could, but they didn't give up their privilege, and they could sue you legally, and they could also file an ethics complaint against you, and you could lose your license through the state board. But if you're willing to risk that for your kind of own moral reasons, you can. But you're not given the clear to break confidentiality in instances of violence whenever it's an adult. Unless, so that's kind of like past violence, unless there's imminent threat for more violence, well, no, it's different. So now now we can break confidentiality. So he hit me, but I don't think he'll do it again. You can't break confidentiality saying that, oh, he hit her. Right? But if he's going to kill me, okay, now we can break confidentiality, which we'll come to in a minute. The other thing to talk about with confidentiality is it's a little different for minors, obviously. The parents are the holder of privilege for minors, which means the parents have the right to determine who gets information that the child provides in therapy. That means that the parents have the legal right to anything that the child says. Okay. Especially with older children, adolescents, we ask the parents to not invoke their privilege and to allow some confidentiality to remain. And talking with the parent and the child about the limits of confidentiality. And in long-term therapy, you may have a conversation with them about, okay, what things are you okay with me keeping between us, and what things, if the kid tells me, you definitely want me to tell you. And doing that in front of the kid. In crisis work, you may not have time for that, so you just really are going to have to inform them of the limits, and that your mom and dad have the right to know everything in here. And you can do briefly, Mom, Dad, are you okay with trusting my judgment in terms of I will definitely tell you if they're going to hurt themselves or doing something really dangerous, but other things I'm going to ask you to allow us to keep confidential. And they may or may not agree to that, but you can give it a shot. But even if they say sure, they always have the legal right to go back and say, no, I want to know everything. And you are legally obliged to tell them that. Okay. Another ethical issue that comes up potentially with potential greater frequency in crisis situations than long-term therapy, client abandonment. We're prohibited from abandoning our clients. And this is about basically that you have a responsibility to meet your professional obligations once a professional relationship has been established. And it doesn't mean you have to treat everyone, but once that relationship has been established, you've got to take reasonable steps to make sure that person gets care. So if they walk out of session angry and don't call back, you're still obligated to call them and take reasonable steps and say, if you aren't interested in getting care with me, I'd be glad to provide you with some referral information. If they tell you piss off, I'm sorry you feel that way, the information is here, right? So we can't abandon our clients. Again, you don't have to follow them to their house to make sure that they do everything you say, but you can't just cut them loose either, especially if they're difficult to like or get along with. That's when we're more tempted to, usually we're more tempted to abandon clients. Another major issue, so we'd come to threats to others. This is when we talk about the Tarasov ruling, which you hopefully read about. What it does mention there is that currently the thinking is Tarasov does not apply in Texas, that the Attorney General issued a document. It's not law, but he issued an opinion saying that this California Supreme Court ruling, which was a state ruling, not a federal ruling, a state ruling in California, does not apply in the state of Texas. And part of that's probably just because, hey, that's California, we're Texas, we want to be our own thing. But there are probably some other reasons too. So the current understanding is if a client tells you about an identifiable victim, you do not have an obligation to warn that victim. Okay? It's not that you don't have an obligation to do something, because you certainly do, but it's not to warn the victim. It's to call the police, the law enforcement officials, and notify them of who the victim is and who the potential perpetrator is. Now, other than just being obstinate and not liking California, why would Texas do that? Why might it be a bad idea, particularly in the state of Texas, to if a client tells you, when I go home, I'm gonna shoot my wife. I'm tired. I can't handle her crap anymore. I'm gonna take her out. Why might it be a bad idea to call the wife and say, I just want to let you know your husband just left here. He was very angry. I tried to calm down. I couldn't, and he said he was gonna hurt you. You need to get out of the house. What might happen? She might shoot him, right? And she might shoot him justifiably in self-defense. But she might also shoot him and commit murder. It could be that on the drive home, he calmed down and said, oh, what was I thinking? That was so stupid. I need to go apologize to her for the way I've been. And he opens the door into his house to apologize, and she lowers the 12-gauge shotgun and puts a 2-foot hole in his chest. Right? We're a heavily armed state. So I'd say there's probably that certainly could happen, and that's why we don't put it in the hands of the victim to defend themselves against something that may happen, because we can't predict perfectly well that it will happen. We have the authorities go in and we allow them to do their job and keep people safe. When we keep people safe by using the tool of law enforcement. So again, Tarasov, not apply to Texas. You have an obligation, but it's not to warn the victim. And if you do warn the victim, it's not clear what would happen. Your client could potentially sue you. That hasn't happened yet. We'll see what happens. It'll happen sooner or later. And we'll see what the case law tells us, because it's up to whatever the courts decide is the law via the results of lawsuits and appeals and whatnot. But again, best bet, call the police. And again, you try to de-escalate the situation to make sure they don't hurt somebody. But if you can't, and you have a reasonable suspicion they're going to hurt somebody, imminent harm, call the police, not the victim. Okay. The other thing related to that is, well, what if it's not a gun? What if it's a communicable disease? Potentially a life-threatening disease, like HIV, AIDS. The laws differ from state to state with regard to notifying a person's partner. And when we think about people being at risk, it's sexual partners and people also that they share needles with. Right? Because those are the primary mode of transmission of the disease through needles and sexual intercourse. In Texas, if you are a health professional, you are allowed to notify the partner, or you can notify the partner notification service, which is probably the Department of Health. Not real clear to me. I've been looking for it to find what the service is, because there's a law establishing a partner notification service, but I can't find it. But healthcare professionals can do that. But healthcare professionals are not therapists under the eyes of the law currently. So as a therapist, you are not allowed to break confidentiality for that purpose. If someone tells you they're HIV positive and they haven't told any other healthcare worker, then as a mental health care provider, you actually are obligated to call the Department of Health and notify them of that individual's name, not the partner, but just of the person who has HIV, because it's part of our requirement for reporting of diseases to promote public health and safety. And the Department of Health will then call that person and talk to them about educating them about the disease and partner notification and things like that. But you can't notify the partner. At least you can't do it and be protected from ethics complaints and lawsuits. Again, it's one of the things that you could do if you had a client who was having unprotected sex with a partner, you knew who that partner was, and the partner didn't know and they wouldn't tell them. You could tell the partner. Right? But if you do that, you're opening up yourself to lawsuits and ethics complaints. So best advice is try to get the person to tell the partner themselves, and work through that as a therapeutic issue, and the importance of disclosure and educating them about transmission. But that's about as much as you can do and still be covered ethically and legally. Okay, and again, and if it's somebody in a crisis situation, they may have just found out they're HIV positive and they haven't told their partner yet. I think obviously you don't want to say, okay, well, you haven't told your partner yet, I'm going to call them right now. If they just found out, let's give them a couple days, and hopefully they'll tell them on their own. But you'll talk to them about, okay, what would happen if you had unprotected sex with them? Now that you know, I've already had sex with them, and while I've had this, they may already have it. They don't know. When you kind of plan through all the things, and if there's somebody you care about, how you decrease the risk of harm to them, and all those things, and then give them space to make the right decision. Okay, that's all for now. Take care.